The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, too bright and too steady, making the quiet hum of the repair shop feel almost intimate. My girlfriend was in the next room, flipping through some paperwork, her voice low and distracted. I should have been paying attention to her, really, but instead, my eyes kept drifting to the other woman. She was standing by the counter, leaning slightly against the edge, arms crossed, reading over a clipboard. Her presence was impossible to ignore. There was an easy confidence in the way she moved, like she belonged anywhere she chose to be, even in a place like this. Dark hair loosely pinned back, a few strands escaping to frame her face, and eyes that didn't just see you. They registered you, measured you, without saying a word. I caught myself pretending to check the serial numbers on a stack of parts, just to steal another glance. A small bell rang as she looked up, meeting my gaze for a second that stretched too long. I jerked my head back, suddenly aware that my hands were holding a wrench a little too tightly. There was a weird sort of electricity in the air, like static before a storm, but calmer, quieter, more dangerous because I had no idea what it meant. "Here," she said, passing me a coffee from the counter. The mug was warm, almost steaming through my fingers. I could feel her attention lingering, though she didn't say anything more. There was something in the tilt of her head, the subtle way her lips curved at the edges, that made it impossible to just take the coffee and walk away. My fingers brushed hers, and it was nothing, yet somehow everything. I shifted on my feet, trying to focus on the checklist in front of me. She glanced at the paperwork on my clipboard, eyebrows raising almost imperceptibly. "That's not going to fix itself," she said, and I laughed, a little too loudly, hoping she wouldn't notice my heartbeat catching. Her laugh followed me as I bent over the workbench, low and soft, like it was meant only for me, even though I knew she had a dozen other people around who could hear it. It wasn't her role to be friendly. She wasn't the type who needed to be liked. And yet, every little gesture, the way she shifted her weight, the way she offered help without pushing, the way she watched me work, felt like an unspoken invitation. I had no idea if it was real, or if it was just my own mind tricking me into noticing things that didn't matter. But I kept noticing. Across the room, my girlfriend was still busy with papers, unaware that my focus had wandered entirely. And yet, in that tiny shared moment of eye contact, when the older woman smiled just slightly before turning back to her own tasks, something had lodged in my chest. I walked back to the bench, trying to keep my mind on the task, but I couldn't shake it. The warmth of her hand on mine, the way her presence lingered in the corner of my vision, like the memory of a melody you can't stop humming. And for some reason I couldn't explain, I had the sudden, dizzying feeling that I would be thinking about that glance long after the lights went out, long after the shop closed, long after everything else faded. It was nothing, and yet it felt like everything. The next day, the shop smelled faintly of oil and wet concrete, a drizzle from outside still clinging to the windows. She was crouched near a toolbox, muttering under her breath while wrestling with a stubborn engine part. I hesitated a moment, wondering if I should leave her to it, but something inside me nudged me forward. "Need a hand?" I asked, trying for casual. My voice sounded small in the large, echoing space. She straightened slightly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, and for a heartbeat, her guard seemed to flicker. "If you don't break anything," she said, voice clipped but not unkind. I nodded, feeling my chest tighten. I knelt beside her, and I noticed the small details I had missed before. The faint crease at the corner of her eyes, the gentle tremor in her fingers as she adjusted the part, the way she exhaled sharply as if holding back something. She was capable, confident, and yet there was fatigue there, a quiet thread of vulnerability she didn't advertise. "Here," I said, handing her a wrench. Our fingers brushed, a lighter touch than yesterday, but somehow heavier in its implication. She didn't pull away immediately. Instead, she focused on the part, jaw set, as if willing herself to ignore it. I worked quietly beside her, listening to the clinks and hisses of the machinery, but really listening to the small, human things. The size, the shift of her weight, the way she muttered something under her breath that almost sounded like frustration, or worry. I wanted to ask, to say something that mattered, but I didn't. I wasn't sure she wanted words. At one point, her laugh escaped, sudden and soft, when a wrench slipped from my hand and clanged against the metal. It was brief, almost swallowed by the ambient noise, but it hit me in the chest like a pulse. I looked at her, and she met my eyes for a fraction of a second before focusing back on the task, pretending nothing had happened. And I knew. She noticed me noticing her. Time seemed to stretch. The small movements, the brushing of fingers, the tilt of her head, the slight arch of her back as she leaned over the engine, felt like a language I was just beginning to understand. Every glance was weighted, every silence a sentence. Finally, she leaned back, rubbing her neck, eyes closing for a moment as if seeking relief from more than just the physical strain. Thanks, she said quietly, almost as an afterthought, her voice a fraction softer than before. I could hear the tiredness threaded through it, the kind she didn't let anyone usually see. I handed her a rag, and our hands met again, longer this time, almost lingering. Neither of us said anything. The room hummed around us, the fluorescent lights flickering slightly, the faint smell of oil and coffee mixing. It was mundane, ordinary, and yet charged. She looked up, meeting my eyes fully for the first time today, and held the gaze a beat longer than necessary. A small smile tugged at her lips, just enough to feel like a secret she was sharing only with me. And in that suspended moment, with our hands barely touching, I realized that something had shifted. Nothing had been said, yet everything had changed. The pull between us was quiet, almost imperceptible to anyone else, but to me, it was undeniable. I wanted to reach closer, to cross that invisible line, but I stayed, letting the tension linger, because some moments were too delicate to rush. Rain tapped against the windows, uneven and insistent, making the repair shop feel smaller, warmer, somehow private. We were the last ones there, cleaning up tools, the day stretching longer than usual. She leaned over the counter, reviewing a work order, and I found myself lingering nearby, pretending to wipe down the bench. "Did you ever fix one of these before?" I asked, gesturing to a stubborn engine part she'd been tinkering with all day. She glanced up, eyebrows lifting. "A few," she said softly, but there was something in the pause before her answer, like she was measuring whether she could trust me with more than the machinery. The quiet between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged, layered. I noticed the way her hand lingered on the edge of the counter, knuckles tight, the faint tremor in her fingers as she adjusted a small screw. She caught me watching, just for a moment, and didn't look away, only blinked slowly. For a second, the world narrowed to the space between us, the hum of the lights, the steady patter of rain, the smell of metal and oil and coffee lingering on her sleeve. I wanted to say something, anything, but every word I could think of sounded too heavy, too dangerous. She let out a small laugh, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "You're staring," she said, almost teasingly, but there was an edge of curiosity there, too. I opened my mouth to respond, then froze. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A name flashed on the screen, one I hadn't expected, an ex, perhaps, someone who had a claim on parts of her that I could only guess at. She glanced at it, a shadow crossing her face, and quickly silenced it. "I should check this later," she muttered, sliding the phone back into her bag. Her voice was softer than before, almost a whisper. The near vulnerability in it made my chest tighten. I wanted to reach for her hand, to say that it was fine, that I didn't care about the interruption, but the moment dissolved before I could. She shifted closer to the counter, and our shoulders brushed. It was light, accidental, but the heat of it lingered. I could feel her breathing change, subtle, unintentional, and my own pulse went quick. There was a pull, magnetic, unspoken, something that shouldn't exist yet did. We both paused, hands frozen mid-motion, tools idle. Outside, the rain intensified, hitting the roof in uneven bursts, like a drum roll I wasn't ready for. "Almost done," she murmured, more to herself than me. And in that instant, I wanted to say everything I hadn't dared, that I noticed her, that I remembered the way she smiled at small things, that I wanted more than just this fleeting brush of contact. But the words stayed locked inside. I swallowed them. She adjusted a piece of metal near the engine, and my hand hovered just a fraction too close to hers before I drew it back, pretending to reach for a wrench instead. The room felt impossibly small, the storm pressing in from outside, while we lingered on the edge of something we both understood but couldn't name. I wanted to lean in, just a little, to close the gap, but didn't. Not yet. The shop was empty, except for the distant drip of water somewhere in the corner. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, leaving a gray haze that seeped through the windows. We'd both been working in quiet, pretending that the day hadn't stretched on too long, that the closeness, the brushes of hands, the lingering glances, wasn't slowly tilting the air between us. "I don't know why we do this," she said suddenly, voice low, almost swallowed by the space. I froze, wrenched halfway to the engine. Her eyes were fixed somewhere past me, distant, but I knew she was talking to me. I glanced at her, trying to read the expression on her face. Something unsteady lurked there, a hesitation that wasn't just about work. "Do what?" I asked, careful, because I felt the fragility in the moment, like stepping wrong could shatter it. "This," she whispered. "This whatever it is. We act like we're just coworkers. Like it's normal." Her fingers tapped against the counter, not enough to make noise, but enough to betray her tension. I don't know if it's curiosity, or loneliness, or something I shouldn't feel. I swallowed, my own throat tight. I wanted to reach for her, to reassure her, but the words tangled in my chest. Instead, I just nodded slightly, trying to convey that I understood, even though I didn't fully. I could see every muscle in her jaw working as she tried to ground herself. She looked at me finally, eyes sharp now, unflinching, and I could feel the gravity of the moment pressing down. "Do you ever think about it? About what this could be?" Her words were careful, like testing fragile glass. I hesitated. Of course I did. But saying it aloud would make it real. Saying it aloud might cross a line we weren't ready for. So I stayed quiet. My silence wasn't denial. It was acknowledgement, small, careful, restrained. She let out a soft breath, almost a laugh, but it was brittle. "Silence doesn't make it easier," she said. She leaned back slightly, crossing her arms, but her shoulders weren't steady. The faint tremor of fatigue and uncertainty was clear. And pretending this is nothing, it's exhausting. I wanted to tell her I felt the same. I wanted to admit that my thoughts wandered to her constantly, that her presence lingered long after the lights went out, long after anyone else had left. But the words were heavy, and I wasn't sure the space could hold them yet. She shook her head lightly, as if trying to clear it. "Maybe we're both fools," she said, voice dropping lower, almost to herself. "Fools for thinking we can pretend this doesn't matter. For thinking it's just work." Her gaze softened suddenly, and there it was, the vulnerability she never showed anyone else. I noticed the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the subtle tension in her jaw, the way her hands gripped the edge of the counter. It was raw, unfiltered. "I don't want to ruin anything," she whispered, almost breaking. "But sometimes, I feel like I already have." Her words hung in the air between us, heavy and fragile. And for the first time, I realized that silence could speak louder than any touch, louder than any glance. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just watched her, knowing that nothing would ever be the same after this moment. The next afternoon, the shop smelled faintly of oil and rain, a leftover dampness clinging to the corners. She was rummaging through a drawer near the back, and I lingered nearby, pretending to check a few bolts. "Why do you keep that?" I asked quietly, nodding toward a small, folded envelope she held. She froze for a moment, as if caught somewhere between memory and reality. Slowly, she opened it, letting the paper unfold. "It's old," she said softly, voice tight. "From a long time ago." Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed the edges. I moved closer, careful not to crowd her. "Doesn't matter," I said. "You can show me if you want." Her eyes met mine for the first time that day, raw and honest. "It's just someone I lost. I wasn't ready to let go, even then," she whispered. "And I don't know why I kept it." I nodded, slowly. "It's okay to remember. I said. It doesn't make you weak. Just human. She looked down at the envelope, then back at me, a flicker of surprise in her gaze. You really mean that? Yes, I said, quietly, because it was true. I noticed the faint line of tension around her mouth, the subtle slump in her shoulders that hinted at all the weight she carried. And suddenly, in the small gestures, how she held the envelope, how her thumb brushed the paper absent-mindedly, I understood a part of her no one else got to see. Her lips pressed together, and she let out a long, soft sigh. He was everything. And then one day, he wasn't. And it feels like I never stopped noticing that absence. Her eyes glistened faintly, not tears, but something just shy of them. Sometimes I think, maybe I never really will. I didn't reach for her hand, not yet, but I felt the weight of the confession settle between us. The air was thick, quiet, heavy with a gravity that neither of us needed to name. I remembered something I'd seen earlier, a photo tucked behind a stack of papers. I pointed gently. That one. She glanced, then nodded. Yeah, it was from a trip. Before everything changed. Her voice broke slightly. I try not to think about it, but I do. I stayed close, careful, letting the silence stretch, letting her story breathe. I didn't interrupt, didn't offer solutions, didn't try to fix what was already fractured. Sometimes the quiet is louder than any words. Then she did something small, almost imperceptible. She tucked the envelope back in the drawer, lingering just a second longer than needed. Her fingers brushed mine as she moved away, and the contact, so fleeting, felt like it had shifted the ground beneath me. Thank you, she said, voice softer than I'd ever heard. Almost a whisper meant only for me. For noticing. And in that tiny, almost accidental gesture, I felt a seismic shift inside me. Something had changed, not in words, not in promises, but in the quiet understanding we now shared. I couldn't name it yet, couldn't touch it, but I knew it was real. She turned back to the workbench, but I stayed where I was, my chest tight, mind racing, unable to stop replaying that small brush of fingers. The room felt heavier somehow, charged with unspoken acknowledgement, and for the first time, I realized that the space between us wasn't just distance. It was possibility. The shop was empty, the hum of the fluorescent lights softer somehow, as if the room itself had slowed down for us. She was wiping down a counter, methodical, precise, but the edge of tension that had clung to her earlier was gone, or at least quieter. I leaned against the doorway, pretending to check some tools, but I wasn't really looking at anything but her. She glanced up, meeting my gaze, and this time there was no hesitation. Just recognition, an acknowledgement that we had both noticed, understood, and survived the weight of our unspoken pull. I didn't mean to make it complicated, she said quietly. Her voice was careful, but softer, steadier. The faint tremor I'd seen before was gone, replaced by something quieter, something like acceptance. You didn't, I replied, my voice low, almost careful not to break the delicate rhythm of the room. I felt the same, I guess. I just didn't know if it was mine to notice. She paused, leaning against the counter, fingers tracing the edge. I noticed the small gestures, how her thumb brushed over the worn wood, how her shoulders slumped only slightly, how her gaze softened as it met mine. In that quiet, shared space, it felt like we had crossed a threshold without words, without theatrics. I stepped closer, careful. My hand brushed hers lightly as I reached for a tool, and she didn't pull away. Just a touch, brief, almost accidental, but it carried the weight of everything we hadn't said. We worked in silence after that, moving around each other, adjusting parts, stacking tools, sharing the same space in a rhythm that somehow felt intimate without needing a label. Every glance, every careful step, every small exhale became part of a conversation we weren't having aloud. At one point, she paused, fingers hovering over a wrench. I watched her, noticing the faint crease at the corner of her eyes, the subtle tilt of her head, the way she exhaled softly. Without thinking, I rested my hand briefly on hers. She didn't move. Our fingers intertwined for a heartbeat, nothing more, nothing dramatic, nothing forced. It was enough. The quiet stretched between us, comfortable now, unspoken but full. The rain outside had stopped, leaving a soft gray light filtering through the windows. And in that calm, the tension that had pulled at us for days didn't vanish. It settled, gentle, deliberate, undeniable. She gave a small smile, just a twitch of her lips, and I returned it. No words, no confessions, just shared understanding. The kind that doesn't need to be shouted to exist. I could feel it in every small movement. The brushing of her fingers against the counter, the way her shoulder nudged mine as we worked in tandem, the faint scent of her shampoo lingering near me. It wasn't perfection. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was something earned, something fragile, something real. Finally, she leaned back slightly, letting her forehead rest briefly against my shoulder. I didn't move. Neither did she. And in that quiet, shared moment, it was settled. We didn't need labels. We didn't need promises. Just this: acknowledgement, proximity, and the gentle inevitability of what had been building for weeks. The rest of the world could wait. We had this. I can still feel that quiet hum, even now, weeks later, when I close my eyes. The shop is empty in my memory, but the echoes of those small, unspoken moments remain. Her hand brushing mine over a wrench, the soft sighs that weren't meant for anyone but me, the way she leaned back and let the weight of everything settle against me without a word. Nothing dramatic changed overnight. We didn't declare anything. We didn't make promises we weren't ready for. But everything shifted. The way I move through the world feels different now. Slower, more aware, more attuned to the quiet connections that actually matter. And I can see it in her, too. She carries a lightness in the way she laughs, a softness in her gaze, a confidence that's tempered now by patience and trust. I've realized that love doesn't always need grand gestures. Sometimes it's in the small things, the shared silence, the fleeting touch, the understanding that doesn't have to be spoken aloud. That's what we found in each other: a rhythm, a space to breathe, a grounding in the ordinary that became extraordinary simply because it was shared. There's a warmth I can't describe, the kind that lingers after someone leaves the room, the kind that makes a mundane afternoon feel like it matters. And even when we're apart, I can feel her presence in that quiet way. The memory of a glance, the touch of fingers against mine, the knowing that we've discovered something rare and real. It didn't fix the past. It didn't erase old heartbreaks or regrets. But it taught us how to notice, how to stay present, how to value the fragile beauty of connection. We learned that sometimes love isn't about rushing forward. It's about allowing it to grow in its own time, in its own space, and in its own rhythm. Looking back, I think the thing I cherish most is how ordinary it all felt, yet how profound it became. The quiet moments between us were loud in ways I'll never forget. And maybe that's the point. Love isn't always fireworks or declarations. It's the subtle, earned understanding that transforms everyday life into something worth holding on to. And as I sit here, thinking of her, I realize how much I've changed, how much we've both changed. And for the first time, I understand that sometimes the most powerful connections aren't announced. They're simply lived, quietly, deeply, and entirely. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?